Hello, welcome back to Data Driven Finance, brought to you by Yodlee. I'm Mike Stiles, and my guests today are Stephen Fishman and Matt McLarty. They're authors of the book Unbundling the Enterprise, APIs, Optionality, and the Science of Happy Accidents. Stephen's North American Field CTO at Boomi and a strategic advisor at Revenium, while Matt is Boomi's Chief Technology Officer. And as the title suggests, there's a lot in the book about APIs, what they can power, how they can be leveraged to create the experiences that we'll no doubt be experiencing in the future. So that's what we're going to mostly talk about. Gentlemen, thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you for having us, Mike.
Yeah, great to be here.
Well, good. Well, Stephen, tell us what the impetus was for writing the book to begin with. I mean, you guys saw something that needed to be explored and you kind of wanted to do that exploration. What was it?
Matt and I have known each other for a while, and I've been working on all sorts of writing projects for the last dozen years or so. And I approached Matt and saying, I think there's room for a book here that can be different than what you see a lot of other API type books are written about. Like, we didn't really want to write like a deep technical book for people who are in the business of building and governing APIs and that sort of realm. We thought that the business world didn't really understand, and the finance world didn't really fully understand the potential. And so we wanted to write something in that zone. I approached Matt. We ended up talking to Gene Kim. He is a personal friend and the founder of IT Revolution, a nice press house that is a A-lister in tech publishing. And we approached him, and it kind of took off from there. Gene was one of the first people who saw the value in optionality, which is, in the title of the book. And that work just kind of developed from that conversation originally with me and Matt and Gene.
Well, and Matt, was there anything in the process of writing the book that actually caught you by surprise or got you thinking in directions that you weren't thinking in before?
Yeah, totally. So as Stephen describes, we wanted to do something a little different. We wanted to aim for more of a hybrid business technology audience, and we really didn't want it to be just constrained by APIs. We were looking at more of the phenomenon of, hey, in digital business, the companies that we think of who are the greatest growth successes, whether it's in Amazon or Google or Facebook, all these giant tech companies that didn't exist 30 years ago and now are the biggest brands in the world. APIs were a big part of their success. We wanted to explore how they became successful, and then how those techniques were used by other companies. So we deliberately went into an open-minded approach to writing and lined up a number of interviews with leaders at some of those organizations, but also other companies that had success using digital techniques in various industries, maybe established before the web. We've talked to, if you read the book, we talked to Best Buy, we talked to Coca-Cola. But the first interview, I think it was the first interview we did, was with a gentleman named David Rice from Cox Automotive. And right away, it was like that interview was so exploding with incredible insights. It really framed a lot of what we did with the book. So it just kind of put us on the course. It validated our approach. And we actually went back a couple times to David because he was such a wealth of information. But a lot of that was about the techniques he'd used and seen used at Cox to not only use APIs, but take a whole strategic approach towards optionality, which is really something that comes from APIs, where you're able to not only deliver solutions for the problem you're trying to solve today, but really open up doors and or maybe more appropriately, not close doors to future opportunities. So that was definitely the one that kicked us into high gear because we realized just how insightful those interviews were going to be, and they certainly proved to be.
Yeah, funny thing is that like that approach that Matt talked about, where we interviewed up to around 20 or so, a little bit more, a little bit less, of like CIOs, CTOs, VPs, et cetera, in different industries all around the globe, not just like technical giants, but all sorts of other types of industries and companies. That approach is what revealed the science of happy accidents, as we refer to it to us. And nobody directly talked about it that way. That concept and that thesis found us, in that every single person we talked to, they all ended up saying one, like, very similar or close to or the same exact thing, that we built these things using these architectural principles, and this like big opportunity found us. Like they didn't plan for those things to happen. Because of the way they built things, these opportunities emerged out of almost nothingness. And that I think the phrase out there is, not all smart people work for you, but if you build something awesome, the smart people will find you and build something on top of what you did. It played out that way in almost, if not every single organization we talked to. Like one of the other earlier interviews was with Thor Mitchell, who was one of the initial product leaders at Google for Google Maps. And just, funny little story, they didn't ever actually intend to sell the API product behind the physical map product. Customers came to them when they saw that the API was there. The developers found it. And so, they went to the Google Maps site, they clicked view source, they saw the API, and they started building stuff on top of it. Like all those embedded maps that you see in like third-party sites like Yelp and Airbnb and all these other places, most of them are built on top of the Google API. And Google now sells that to the high seven-figure number as a product and as a service. And all those people called them and said, we want to use this product. We want to pay for this product because we're going to build our business around it. And we didn't think it'd be here if we don't find a way to pay for it.
Yeah, that's great. Sometimes if you actually listen to the customer, they'll show you the way, won't they?
Yep.
Well, Stephen, the book is relevant for people across all industries, but our audience is financial services and fintech mostly. So is there anything unique to that space that just kind of jumps out at you from what the book covers?
Yes, very much so. I talked to a number of different organizations in financial services spaces about like embedded finance, monetization, and open banking and stuff like that. And I've been doing work with the European financial services community on GDPR and open banking for a bit now. It's funny. I think one of the terms that Matt and I have been saying recently is yesterday's choices are today's necessities. And you look at the organizations here, like the financial services organizations here in the US, who have already prepared for this eventuality regarding open banking, whether it is, Capital One or Bank of America, and they've got like a decomposed infrastructure already in place. And so, as a result, with the new regulations coming up from the CFPB, there are those who are already prepared for this eventuality, in not just in terms of their architecture, but also in terms of their skills. That choice that they made a couple of years ago to align to a different type of unbundled economy inside their organization, that is putting them on the front foot. Now that this big market change is actually taking impact, they're going to be the ones who are, fully positioned and ready to exploit this new opportunity. Because, in the way that most other, ecosystems have become open, they drive lots of consumption. It happens in every single one, and banking is not an exception there. You're going to see a lot more dynamism and movement in the financial services community because of this regulation. And the consumers will benefit, the banks will benefit, the fintechs will benefit. But the ones who are going to benefit the most are the ones who prepared for this outcome a couple years ago.
Yeah, hopefully I just heard all the ears perk up from people in our audience because it's very, very relevant stuff to them. Matt, if I just fell off the turnip truck, and I'm not even that fond of turnips, explain to me what exactly an API makes possible and how those possibilities can't be ignored anymore as we move toward more of a digital economy.
Yeah, there's so many ways. Like we use the term API pretty generically. Like if you get deep into the API community, there's very pedantic discussions about what an API is, and people might assume it's a certain technical thing, but really we're just talking about programmable network accessible interfaces between software. So it's essentially if the browser or the UI is what allows a human to use the software, then the API allows software to use the software. Maybe I'll use the financial services as an example of this. Like I actually started my career at a bank many years ago. Even before that, I was working summer jobs at a payment software company. The idea of networked software solutions across multiple business entities and financial services is pretty old, predates the internet, right? We've had credit card transaction networks, ATM networks for quite a while. And so the APIs enable these ecosystems. APIs do it in a little more of an open way. Typically now we use the web. We have more standardized interfaces. They sort of democratize the ability to make those connections. But APIs have spread. I mean, really, it is the connective tissue of the web. So APIs have been behind every big web movement that's come along, whether it's enabling likes on social media, in the social media revolution, and 20 years ago, it's what we're still unfortunately living through. um, Whether it's through the mobile revolution, if you're using mobile banking apps, you're using APIs to power all the services. And if you think the phone is smart, as soon as you lose network connectivity, you realize it's not very smart. It's all those APIs that are making it smart. APIs, are empowering cloud computing, where we're allowing, now more remote and virtualized workloads. And what makes them special, I think, is that it's that ubiquity and that general understanding of, okay, if there's an API, then it's not so hard for somebody to connect things together. So when we talk about unbundling the enterprise and we talk about unbundling through APIs, it's really to open things up and make all the business capabilities that you may have in your software across your enterprise accessible in a way that makes it just easy to plug and play in any sort of new context. We talk about these APIs as being decontextualized business capabilities that can be recontextualized into any sort of user experience that you have. I mean, to use a little bit of a non-financial example, you think about the sort of second wave of web companies that have come and become big brands like Airbnb, Yelp, Uber, and so on. The way they've built their businesses is on top of a whole foundation of third-party APIs. So if you're ordering an Uber or Lyft, you're getting your mapping information from Google Maps, you're getting your payment services through Stripe, you're getting your telecommunication services via Twilio, and even the app that you're using is using APIs to connect back to the headquarters of those companies. So they're everywhere. You don't see them, but they're the foundation of the whole web economy.
Yeah, and I like the analogy that it's the connective tissue of the web. I'm personally fond of the connective tissue in my body. I don't know why someone would not want things held together, but you can kind of get the picture of this is what it ties all of the elements, all the players in the internet together to serve consumers in various ways. But Stephen, how are financial institutions doing in terms of not just implementing APIs, but understanding and taking action on putting them to the most effective uses?
I think that's a great question. And there are a couple who really stand out. There are companies in the financial services industries who are effectively their entire product and their entire offering is an API thing that makes all of their value easily deliverable. Let's Square, Stripe, from the payments world, all that stuff, 100% all moves through APIs, and that's what enables vendors and other people to stitch together a payment model that allows them to collect payments from their customers, and all that happens 100% through APIs. Two others who are a bit more of the meta players, like Plaid and Akoya, that is 100% of what their offering is. An API platform that helps stitch together for consumers and other people a way to see across multiple financial institutions at once. You also obviously Yodlee's in that game. I know that's a bit about what you guys do. Two others who I think are of note because they're not always thought about this way would be Capital One and Bank of America. Capital One has actually been doing something. It's inside the book. It's called Capability Capitalization. It's chapter 6, and it's all about organizations who have looked inside their companies of things that they're already doing and finding internal capabilities that they have that they can bring outside to market and turn them into a specialized service for that. And that is not a little niche behavior. That is a big market category creating event that can happen. Like that is the story of AWS. Amazon built all of those capabilities inside their organization to be able to make technology capacity and programming capacity available on demand. They created the infrastructure as a service category through taking something they had already done and then packaging it outside, where Capital One is trying to repeat exactly that. They found a number of things that they're excessively good at, like using Snowflake and other tools in the data world, and they've built new tools on top of Snowflake and then set up a brand new company, Capital One Software, to be able to distribute and become a hybrid bank and a fintech all at once, creating a brand new revenue stream from stuff they already had. And there's a detailed section in the book that talks about the specific economics and why that is a highly profitable and high margin world to go in. The other one I mentioned is Bank of America. Bank of America's done a great job in creating an API product that is targeted towards treasurers, the Cash Pro product. They've been a great leader in that space of actually becoming hybrid, banking software companies with APIs as the physical extension and the surface area on how they are actually both creating and delivering value to their constituents.
Well, we just had a compliance expert on the show, and we really got into the CFPB 1033 rule, which really doesn't give financial businesses a choice. I mean, they're required to get APIs in place that allows consumer data sharing by April, I think is the deadline. Matt, is this regulatory overreach, or is it kind of a tough love, helpful unlocking of API functionality?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about this regulation, and it really does follow a global trend we've seen, open banking. I think probably the early proponents of open banking would assume that everyone would be on board. I think with what they found is that for banks, right, if it's already can be sort of a closed market with big players, they're going to resist anything that would seem to take away some of their control. I can't speak to the timelines. I mentioned that I worked at a bank. I know how hard it can be to get things moving sometimes. But I think what we teach in the book and how that would play to this would be, number one, it's another example of where optionality is your friend. As Stephen was just describing, right? Capability capitalization. If you've already been building your software systems to be open on the inside, so API enabled capabilities that you're using to connect together and provide your own services and products, even if you haven't yet opened up those APIs to the outside world, it's just so much easier then to almost flip a switch and be able to go out and offer those same services to external parties. And in this case, I think it's providing transaction information, customer information type stuff. Optionality would take you a long way and make it not such a heavy lift to go out there. But I think the most interesting angle around open banking in general, I mean, it's being sort of championed in the name of consumer rights and being able to have access to your consumer information. It's championed in the name of sort of the fintech startup industry of saying, hey, if this information were available via API, then there could be these value-added services that third parties could provide on top of the banking information. I think that the banks need to look at this as an opportunity space as well, though, and not just resist. When these regulations took hold in the UK, which had been in place for a few years, there was a lot of what people were calling cynical compliance. Like, in other words, we'll meet the letter of the law without necessarily meeting the spirit of the law. I think that's a mistake because anytime you can sort of play offense, anytime there's a new space, there will be opportunities for the biggest players, whether that's being a broker of services for creating communities of third-party services, investing in the space. Like, there's a whole lot of opportunity. And in our book, we in chapter 4, I believe it is, we get into this notion of value dynamics. And this is where you can really map out a whole business ecosystem and look at all the links of where you are exchanging value with your partners, customers, and so on. It's a visual way of mapping things out. Taking that approach and really mapping out what the open banking ecosystem would look like is a great way to get on offense in the open banking space, because it is kind of inevitable. Like, we've already seen a number of those fintech players. If there's no APIs, they'll screen scrape their way into getting the information they need. So if you're able to open it up and you get more control, you can look across the ecosystem, and then you can put in your own measurements and feedback mechanisms to be more in control of that whole ecosystem as it rolls out. So I think my guidance to the banks would be another reason to drive for more optionality, but also an opportunity to play offense in a burgeoning ecosystem.
Well, Stephen, let's pretend that I am a bank. I mean, I understand the 1033 rule and whether it sticks around or not. I'm pretty much a dinosaur if I don't get an API plan in place. So what are the things I should do or address when building out that strategy?
That's a book in and of itself.
I expect royalties.
But, I'll give my top three. And so first is and the book lays this out in terms of a methodology that we refer to as the OOPS methodology, which aligns with our concept of happy accidents. So that is optionality, opportunity, and optimization. And the each one of those are the OP, and together we string them, three O's and the P. That's the OOPS methodology. The first one is optionality or decomposition by default. And right now, if you work inside of a big organization and you've got Agile or other mechanisms that you use to scope projects and decide how you're gonna move ahead, a thing will happen where basically the business leaders or the finance leaders will compress a team and say that, hey, if you wanted to take this particular technical approach, you're going to have to justify exactly why that thing leads to a better business outcome and better revenue, or we're not going to do it. Because if you can't say exactly what it is that you're creating, then there's no reason to do it. Like our book shows through economic proofs that you have to turn that on its head. It actually doesn't work that way. The math doesn't work that way. And that instead we say decomposition by default. And that doesn't mean build an API for everything and make everything as small as possible no matter what. It only means from a conversational structure that the actual burden of proof should actually be on the other side. Because the way that optionality and future asymmetric gains work is that through creating these options, like Matt said earlier about keeping doors open, there's value in keeping doors open, financially provable and measurable value. One of the deep thinkers in the book that we reference is Professor Carlos Baldwin. She's professor emeritus at Harvard, and she actually built an entire career actually quantifying the value of technical optionality inside of ecosystems. So like the value is there, and helping teams understand that it's actually better to prepare for the future than to try to predict the future. And that by preparing for this optional universe in which n different futures can happen, you'll actually find that all these immense value and asymmetric value opportunities will find you. And you'll end up being in the catbird seat of being able to take advantage when changes in the market happen. Like the phrase from Dr. Baldwin is, when consumer tastes are heterogeneous and unpredictable, option value is high. And what that describes our universe. People like different things. People change what they like because the world changes around them. Because of that, actually keeping your options open in the form of decomposing your capabilities into small independent packages of value that you can then take and mix and remix however you want. Because of that, you'll find that you're ready to take advantage of whatever changes happen in the market. The second is opportunity, and Matt just talked about it when he talked about laying out the ecosystem so you can determine where's the ripest fruit that you can go after. And the last one is optimization, and that's all about feedback loops. And that in order for this whole strategy to work, the optionality brings the treasure close to the surface. The opportunity allows you to find which islands you should be hunting on, because there's a big pirate theme throughout the whole book. And the optimization makes it really cheap to be able to dig in 20 and 1,000 places at once, so that the treasure is always close to the surface and you're always digging in places where that asymmetric value will come from. So driving down the cost of experiments is a very key thing to focus on to help your time to innovation and your time to impact compress down to the point where these treasures will be finding you one after the other after the other. And that's what we refer to as the science of happy accidents.
And Matt, the whole thing is about data. I mean, some might see data, some businesses might see data as this protected, exclusive asset. You guys make the argument, no, it's not. It's non-fungible, non-rival, and its value actually goes up if you apply and allow for more context. Can you kind of expand on that a little?
I think that in the digital space, like the dynamics of the economics just completely change. And we probably are all aware of that, but one of the things we wanted to dive in on is like really studying that. So Stephen was just talking about Dr. Carlos Baldwin. Her background was in studying financial markets and option value there. And then she sort of transposed that over to the technology world. We kind of wanted to do sort of an economic study of data, and this is really, I'm sure, for any economist listening, kindergarten level economics. But when you study the types of goods that are out there that create these different economic dynamics, they have all these properties. And you mentioned some of them, like being fungible means that you can sort of exchange one item for another. A barrel of oil is fungible because you can take one barrel of oil out, put another barrel of oil in. In the data world, the reason why data is so precious is because it's non-fungible. Like my customer information is different than Stephen's customer information, different than your customer information. And so having that, knowing those preferences, I mean, my goodness, how much of the web economy has been built on personalization and ad targeting and so on. Then you've got the non-rivalry, which means if I'm using the item, no one else can use the item. So a physical product is more of a rivalrous product because if I have it, you can't have it. Data is non-rival, meaning that you can replicate it all over the place, and importantly, you can replicate it at little cost, right? With storage and network infrastructure and so on, getting data around. Once the data toothpaste is out of the tube, you can't get it back in. It's all out there. But the other one, I think that the other property I think is really interesting is this experience good versus search good is the I think the economic terms. Really what that means is a search good is something with a relatively static value that can be known. So you can look up the price of a barrel of oil and it's got a market value and you know what to pay for it. Whereas an experience good is you don't know what something is worth until you actually use it. And it depends on what context it's used in. This is, I think, so essential to the digital economy and the properties of data in that if let's look at Facebook as an example. When it started out, people were saying, what is this thing? Oh, look at this. I can go find my old high school friends I haven't talked to in a while. All I have to do is, give some of my personal information and it's free. And then it was, oh, look, I can share the things that I like with my friends. They can see what I'm into these days. Like giving this stuff away because it had really little value or little perceived value for consumers. And then over time, Facebook, who I think at one point people were questioning whether there was a business model, just absolutely turned that data set into a massive multi-billion-dollar business by utilizing it for profiling, ad targeting, and so on, right? So the value of data varies wildly depending on the context. So this is, again, if we look at APIs as the channel for data exchange, they become the channel for value exchange in the digital economy. And you can get some very lopsided value exchanges happening that may not be perceived at all by one of the sides of the exchange. So I think this is, again, where, utilizing this thinking around the OOPS methods, especially around the value dynamics when I was mentioning before, gives people much more insight into not only like what money is being exchanged between organizations, but all the other currencies of value that can be exchanged. And data is a very unique and important one, maybe the most important one in the digital economy, because it's where you can have these imbalances of trade, and having more awareness of it helps you, rectify that and not be exposed to being duped in a big lopsided trade.
And we'll wrap it up with you, Steve, with me asking, so what can go wrong? What are the risks and pitfalls of this kind of API-driven digital transformation?
That's a great question. I have three that I'll go over. One is actually, you'll find, like when we did the research in the data, it was really strange. is that a lot of organizations believe that the risk is, I make these external these APIs that are meant to be for internal use, I make them external. And why would I do that? Where's the value? And they don't understand the financials of it. And they actually don't really understand the risk. And that's not really knowing what you don't know. That's one of the big risks. Because when you actually look at the data, two really surprising things jump right out. Number one, the companies that actually share external APIs and make their data accessible, they beat their rivals by 16 to 17% in their ability to deliver value and growth. And that the companies who only do it inside don't actually gain any ground or create any white space against their competitors at all. So the risk there is thinking that, all right, the right way to do this is to go internal because we haven't figured this all out yet. And therefore, we're just going to make everything internal and that'll be safer. And so the risk is you're foregoing what the advantage and the reason to do it is, because there is big financial growth at place. And the other half of that risk is actually the flip of it. The surprising fact is that the organizations who go internal only, they actually suffer more breaches than those who don't, which feels like it should be the opposite of that. But when you actually understand what's going on, it all makes sense. That the organizations that build things with this internal only mindset, which is more often than not a financial driven decision. It's cheaper for me to believe that I can make this thing for internal use only because I don't have to pay for all this other security stuff, given that no one from outside will ever use this thing. Well, that's not a really smart defense strategy because it doesn't create the layers on which that they allow you to defend yourself from breaches and other things. So the people with this internal only mindset, they leave themselves open to fat fingering or bad actors or other things going wrong that actually enable more breaches to happen. So those are two big risks. The third big risk is it's the flip of what we talked about earlier with Dr. Baldwin. That Dr. Baldwin spoke about option value is high when consumer tastes are heterogeneous and unpredictable. The converse is also 100% true. That rigidity is existentially dangerous when consumer tastes are heterogeneous and unpredictable. There's an immense risk in not doing this. And the way to see this is, you look at COVID from 3 years ago, that the organizations who didn't prepare for that event, what happened? That retail, restaurants, et cetera, if they weren't ready to shift into curbside, delivery, mobile, all these other spaces that are expressly created out of API-based optionality, because all that stuff is all driven through APIs. What happened to them that they weren't ready? They're not here anymore, or they've lost so much market share and relevance that they won't be very much longer. The biggest risk is in not accepting the fact of how the math and economics work here.
Well, it's all definitely fascinating and very topical stuff that we're talking about here. So I'm glad both you guys agreed to be with us. Obviously, we only scratched the surface of everything that's available in the book. So Matt, if somebody wants the book so they can really get on top of this stuff, maybe even lead the unbundling in their organization, how do they get it?
Well, I would love to think they could go into their local independently owned bookstore and pick up a copy. But the reality is we're in the digital world. Go to Amazon. We talk about Amazon a lot in the book. Probably
Sure.
the best place to go. And if you do buy it and like it, leave us a review. That matters a lot to us. So
it's available on Audible, Kindle, also at Barnes & Noble too. Barnes & Noble is our friend.
Perfect. Well, if you're listening, go ahead and subscribe to the show. As you heard, we don't really waste your time here. We're trying to make you the smartest person in the room. And if you want to see how aggregated financial data might be of great use in your business, just visit resources.yodlee, that's YODLEE.com/podcasts. And we'll see you next time on Data Driven Finance.